Greetings, one and all, to the first ever episode of Reading Dungeons and Dragons Aloud. I am historian, journalist, gadfly, man about town, and ascended android Ben Riggs. And with me, for the first time ever on this totally brand new podcast, YouTube channel, whatever media you're listening to us on, is
Dr. Scott M. Bruner, late of University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Go Panthers. Good morning, everyone.
so. Let's take a minute and talk about what we're going to be doing on this podcast, since some of you will be familiar with us and some of you won't be, and this is going to be the first episode. So people are probably going to find us via this. And I've been thinking about it, Scott, and I feel like what we do is we look at tabletop role-playing games through the lens of history in my case and academia in yours. Do you think that's an accurate summary?
Sure, I'm not exactly sure what academia necessarily means, because it's such an unbelievably wide umbrella. But that, at the same time, I have no idea exactly what my lens is either. I mean, for those two people who've ever read my dissertation, I actually apply theories of quantum mechanics and double slit phenomenon to tabletop role-playing games. I'm very much interested in the social material and imaginative realities that we create through, that we create through tabletop role-playing games. So we have two very, I would say, rather eclectic approaches to tabletop role-playing games that people have somewhat found compelling and challenging. And as always, the most important thing about this is sometimes it's as much talking about tabletop role-playing games as it is playing them.
Hey, somebody on the internet last week said that this podcast, us talking together, is the best thing on the internet, Scott. That
Yeah.
is high praise.
Thank you to BX Kid, who is the person who said that. I've been telling that to probably about 30 people have had me say that before. Of course, I had a couple people say back to me like, that person's never found Google yet. But I appreciate that. That was a very nice compliment.
Well, and I will also note, again, if someone is coming in this totally raw, we are recently of the Plot Points podcast. That podcast, after 11 years, came to an end, and we are kind of spinning off and doing our own thing. And if you want to hear, so we have for years been slowly reading through the Dungeon Master first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. I will put a link in the show notes to Plot Points, so that if you want to go and check out that DMG Aloud stuff, you can. But let me get a notebook out. But we are planning on going beyond the Dungeon Master's Guide here. We're gonna definitely do that. Like, again, we're putting this plane together in flight, so your thoughts are definitely valuable. And let us know what you think. I, by the way, am admin at readingdndaloud.net. If you want to email me with thoughts, and I think Scott is Scott at readingdndaloud.net. So you can let us know directly what you think about any of this. But I'm assuming we'll probably do half DMG Aloud, half other important, interesting stuff, to get some variety in there. I will note, to those of you that are loyal D&D Aloud listeners, I don't know if I'm going to read all those tables anymore, Scott. I just don't know if I'm going to do it.
That's heresy.
Oh,
We're going to have to talk about that offline.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that. But like, if there's
one, can we hold them up? I mean, if we're doing this now, and for something, I guess we'll be doing video now. We can maybe hold those tables up to the camera or something. See page 175.
Yeah,
I can be like Vanna White while you and now there's a table, and I will illustriously.
I mean, it's not a bad idea, frankly. Putting images of the tables up. Maybe that would make it better. But the thing I loathe the most is, oh God, a page of tables. Gary, why? We're also, I think, going to probably be having some guests on, trying a few things out with a third voice on the podcast. But again, this is a plane that we're assembling mid-flight. But I was very conscious of the fact that it's been over a month since people got some podcast product from us, and I wanted to hit the ground running. I think one of the other things that we are aiming for is an episode a week, except for holidays, right, Scott?
That absolutely.
Yeah, so if you're enjoying this, hopefully there is more coming towards you in a quick fashion. Lastly, there's going to be some kind of Patreon. He and I have to talk about it. If you have any ideas for what you'd like to see on the Patreon, that would be great. I certainly I believe in maximum reach. So whatever we do with the Patreon, it's not going to be anything like, oh, half the episodes are behind a paywall, or I just think that our content is our content and our listeners are our listeners, and I don't believe in putting a limitation on that. But we'll figure something out. I mean, we have lots of crazy ideas.
I want to, yeah, and I also want to, didn't mean to interrupt you there, Ben, but I wanted to quickly make sure that everybody knows if you want to share your ideas with us in person, Mr. Riggs and myself will be at GaryCon, as a matter of fact, doing this podcast YouTube video live in front of a live studio audience. Like I wish we had a set, like we actually have a living room set where we read things. But that will be Friday at 6 o'clock at GaryCon, and that would be a fantastic opportunity if people want to come and have a chat with us about what they would like to see as the show kind of moves to this new close reading of lots and lots of eclectic and varied sundry role-playing text. So we'd love to hear from you guys, not only, via the intertubes, but also live and in person.
That's Friday, March 22nd, correct?
Yeah.
Great.
I'm
Terrific.
never good with these.
Pardon?
I believe so.
Yep. I asked off the 22nd, so if it's not the 22nd, we're in trouble. But I believe it's the 22nd. With
It
that,
is.
oh, good. With that, we are going to start out today and start out this podcast with a section of a text of personal importance to me. The first Dungeons and Dragons product I purchased was the second edition AD&D Player's Handbook. That was the first product I ever bought. I bought it at a used bookstore, even though it was not. Yep, I didn't buy it used. It was some sort of overstock or something on sale for $10 at a used bookstore in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, half off the cover price of the princely sum of $20 in 1989. But I would like to read aloud, Scott, the introduction to the AD&D Second Edition Player's Handbook, if that is all right with you, sir.
It is, but I do think it's important that we, I've thought, we've been since the format of the show has been changing. I've been thinking a lot about, why do people kind of listen to the show, and
why do people? Sorry.
But it's an interesting question, and people certainly have kind of, been rather interested in kind of what we do. And I've often wondered, like, what is it that is compelling and interesting about this thing? And I do think one of the things that brings what I've not only been thinking about why people listen to the show, but why I can't stop. I'm not a historian like you are, Ben, but I am. But there's periods of history that I can get absolutely obsessed with. People know me. I'm obsessed with baseball history. I'm obsessed with hockey history. Those are the two sports that I follow. But I'm also obsessed with role-playing game histories. There's not a book that comes out that I don't really gobble up. I've read almost all of the kind of, the major ones from obviously your fantastic book, Slaying the Dragon, to Game Wizards, to to Playing at the World, the David
Art and Arcana,
book.
Art and Arcana.
Yes, Art and Arcana. I've read Empire and Imagination a number of times, and I always come back to this concept of, is it, and I do think there's a part of it's nostalgia, and I just think it's important to go a little bit more about why, the reason we're reading this one is because this has so much emotional resonance to you, but it also has emotional resonance to me. And I think these books they're more obviously than just their text, right? Their context, what they mean to us, what the game how it was able to catalyze our imagination in ways that we have such unbelievable fond memories of. As I say that, by the way, my computer stand has the book Hawk and Moore, book 1 by Kent David Kelly. I don't know if you've ever read those. They're these enormous tomes about the creation of Greyhawk and Blackmore. And they're really fun they're really, really interesting. Those would be fun to read.
Wait, I'm sorry. Tell me about those books again.
There's I don't know how many of them there are. I actually only have the first one because I haven't finished it yet. It's by Kent David Kelly, and it's a history book of Greyhawk and Blackmore, and the two, obviously we've got Blackmore being created in Minneapolis and Greyhawk in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
So is it a history of the creation of them, or is it a history of the game worlds? Like
both.
Really?
Yeah, and I don't know why. I know they're not.
How do I not know about this? Hang on.
Yeah,
Kent. I'm going to Amazon. Kent David Kelly?
Kent David Kelly. And there's more than one. Like I said, I'm in the middle of the first one. And they're large.
Old school. Oh, is he the old school guy? Let's see. Oh, he does Castle Old Skull. If
Yeah,
you
I'm
so
not.
if,
Yeah.
if you're not familiar with Castle Old Skull, it's kind of an OSR uh dungeon generator is the almost insulting way to put it, given how much time and effort he has put into perfecting it. Um, like flipping through Amazon, it's like Game World Generator, Old Skull Gaming Supplement, The Classic Dungeon Design Guide to Castle Old Skull Gaming Supplement. Like he has written comprehensively about using but just how to do old school design, and apparently he is really into using Midjourney for his work now, because he also has a book up that came out 2 years ago called Beginning with Midjourney, an unofficial starting guide for AI art design. um, and if you are an artist, you can be horrified by that. That would certainly explain why all his other books have amazing cover art, if he's using Midjourney for that. But I don't want to fall down an AI debate hole at the very beginning of our first episode. But I will dutifully acquire and read those books, because I can't believe I did. Like, I feel like, again, every D&D history book that there is, I immediately buy and read. So
Right.
I'm shocked
Right.
that there's something I haven't bought and read.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I think that's just so important to think about. Exactly. Like, I don't have an answer to this. Like, this is a question, we could use the term rhetorical question. The concept that I still don't understand exactly what it is. Although I have some ideas, I think there's something that's unusual and unique about these games for taking us back to a specific time in our lives where our imaginations were kind of so rich and so entangled with who we were. And in many ways, certainly in high school, at some of those times, a lot of us needed escapes from the world and needed places that we could go and have maybe some control over. But these games are the times. I think tabletop role playing games exist in an area that other games don't necessarily have, around how important they are to us, about how we kind of emerged as people, what they mean to us for. I think I don't think I know a lot of people will point to the pandemic as being a flashpoint for so many people getting back into tabletop role playing games, but I also think there's a specific age where I hate to use the term midlife crisis, where people do go back to role playing games. Every time, there's so many times we run into people at conventions and they talk about, oh, I'm getting back into role playing games. I found your podcast. It tends to be it's often around, there was this like 10 or 15, maybe 20-year gap before they got back into role playing games. And it's funny how many people kind of rediscover these things. It's also funny about how many people are unable to throw away their old books because of how important these tomes are to us. Again, I think that should be, and I think nostalgia is too sparse a word to use for what these kind of games mean to us and why people might want to listen to it, because every time we do hear Gary's words, there is this spark of remembrance of what they meant to us when those words were more than just uh, ink on a dead tree page. They literally were the magic runes that could inspire such unbelievable imaginative realms and worlds and adventures and way to connect with our friends that still work sometimes today, but hold such an enormous meaning for us from when we were absolutely, kind of ready to flex our own imaginations. And that's all a preface, by the way. Those of you who are new to this podcast, the first thing you have to understand is we do digress quite a bit.
People
Is
say
that
they're here for the digressions, so
Yeah.
we've embraced it. Can I respond to that, or were you not finished?
I just want to make sure that I talk about my emotional resonance to the player's handbook before we begin reading.
Do it, please. You go first then, because you're on a roll.
Well, the one that I'm holding up right now means so much to me, just as yours means so much to you. And in the same way that we can remember when we got this was an Easter present when I was in high school. And I want to say that I was a senior in high school. But this came out in 1989. That made that
1989. Yep.
No, that would have made me a junior sophomore, which is interesting. But I still remember getting it. I remember we were on our way to church. I had just gotten it, and I can remember the couch I'm laying on as I open it up, and I remember specifically reading the section that we're about to read on that couch in Omaha, Nebraska, when I was, 16 or 17, and it's we've often talked about, we've got to get Mr. David Zeb Cook on this thing on the podcast. And I always, this book is also important to me because then I would move to Germany after my senior year of high school. And I spent the entire summer where I had no friends in Germany doing nothing, but I had two things. I had like the player's handbook, and I had the kit book for the Thieves Handbook, which has a whole section on how to make thieves guilds in different cities. And I spent my entire summer doing two things. One, making my own dice and cards game, because I didn't know Stratomatic existed back then, and two, making nothing but Thieves Guild after Thieves Guild after Thieves Guild after Thieves Guild. And if we want to talk about emotional resonance of these games, not only do they catalyze our imagination, but my gosh, could they be friends and fill up our time with just, unbelievable, like just the infinite imaginative vistas that they provided for us, which is so important to us. But this is the same player's handbook that I'm currently using to run a game on Sunday nights. And I guess I won't say too much more, but my gosh, I can't open up this book and not be drawn back to being a high school kid again and how important this book is to me, just like all of the books are, right? And they're different. They're different. The DMG guide is more like the Necronomicon. This one was more friendly. When I read David's Mr. Zeb Cook's writing, it was like I couldn't believe that this was a person talking to me about the responsibility of taking Dungeons and Dragons into the next age, and he felt like a real person that I could connect with. And I was like, this is a cool guy. It never occurred to me, hey, whatever happened to Gary Gygax? I just figured Gary had like transcended to, the Asimar stage, I suppose, and had like gone beyond. I don't know.
Yeah, there was no internet back then, so they had a way more
Right?
tight control over things,
Now I know too much about the second edition, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that
Poor
wasn't
Gary.
exactly made under the best of circumstances. But to me, this book was like so cool.
So I want to point out the distinction between the value of this as nostalgia and the value of a tabletop role-playing game as a radical new medium which actually brings people together in the 21st century. Um, like I definitely picked this text for our first text today because of its nostalgia value, and I think and I had a very different encounter and use of this text than most people because I was pretty friendless in seventh and eighth grade when I got this. So I read it and made characters and kind of thought about gaming and kind of like played through in my head a little bit. John Ratliff, who will also be at GaryCon and is an D&D editor of long standing and also the foremost Tolkien scholar living today. Um, he said that he got the rules in the 70s and got adventures and just ran through them solo. And I didn't even do that. I wish that thought occurred to me because that sounds like it would have been a ton of fun, actually. But I had this very solitary encounter with the text in the game. And again, at the time, I just knew that I found this fascinating and absorbing. Looking back on it from the vantage point of a 45-year-old, there were only two things at the time that were really talking to me about being an adult and being a man. One of them was my Catholic grade school, and I got one version of being an adult and being a man from that Catholic grade school. And it certainly felt to me like the AD&D second edition player's handbook was saying, but this is the way things really are. And in some way, shape, or form, it was giving me truths that I was not getting at Catholic grade school. Um, hey, if you're strong enough, you can lift bars and bend bars and lift gates.
Right.
And again, obviously, I knew that that wasn't true, and yet it did feel like there was, because of the simulationism of the rules, it felt like there was something in them that I needed to know. Uh, I teach seventh and eighth grade, and I teach The Great Gatsby to the eighth graders every spring, and uh, the eighth graders tend to love it because to them it seems like this letter from adulthood. Like, hey, look at how messed up these adults are and the crazy things these adults are doing that you've never really considered before, but become almost instantly fascinating to you because it's a world you're going to enter. And somehow the AD&D second edition player's handbook did that for me. But when you talk about people rediscovering the game at this age, I think that is because of the value of the tabletop role-playing game as a medium. Um, I love Batman the Animated Series. I bought the first season of it when it came out on DVD 20 years ago. I watched a couple episodes and I'm like, oh man, I can see why I loved this as a kid. But again, it does not speak to me as an adult beyond that nostalgia. And again, it's great. Like when my kid turns 10, 11, 12, I'll probably show it to him because again, the art of it seems to have aged well. But again, I'm 45. I'm not really like, man, I got to watch the entire run of Batman the Animated Series.
It's funny.
Tabletop role playing game. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just say I I'm struck by the fact that we have the same experience. I tried to watch it again as well, and man, I was addicted to that show in high school. And now I'm like, I can get through a couple. My guess is there's probably a lot of people that are going to disagree with us. Excuse me, on this podcast, because I know people swear by it, but same thing. Yeah, Batman didn't quite work as well as it did.
Yeah,
We were hungry, of course, for anything that looked like Tim Burton's Batman at the time.
it's
If you
true.
remember
It's
the
true.
thirst for that movie when
Yeah,
it came out.
yeah, it's true. But again, the tabletop role playing game
Mhm.
is a medium with stronger legs. And again, this is the hobby horse I keep returning to. We are still parsing out the impacts of that new medium here in 2024, and it's why the tabletop role playing game is still so exciting and vital. Even if I think it's economically going to be entering a stagnation or decline, which is a separate thing that you can read all about that on the internet if you want to. Um,
Where
but
really?
yeah, yeah. It turns out when I said that, people had thoughts, Scott. People had thoughts.
People had thoughts.
Yeah, but
That's
that said, should we actually start reading the text?
well, yeah. It's
Feel free to say no and you talk about something else.
no. I mean, I regress a lot, but we could spend a couple hours talking about, I mean, one of those reasons that tabletop role playing games, kind of fell. I shouldn't say fell out of favor necessarily, but it's interest. Of course, it's one of the other things talk about people rediscovering them now. Is now they're cool, and if you remember, I mean, again, I'm just a little bit older than you as well. Like there was that phase in the early 1980s where tabletop role playing games were tabletop role playing games was really one. It was Dungeons and Dragons, and it was the coolest thing. Like all the teenagers were playing it. They were who were running the games for me as a kid, and then they were very uncool for about, and I mean, like, you hid your books. You did not mention that you did that. Saying that kid plays Dungeons and Dragons was an insult in the mid 80s, right? And so again, it's always interesting to me to discover to see the cool kids are now playing. I mean, yeah. The cool kids now play D&D, which is kind of different as well. And now that without that social stigma, people have a little bit more free reign to be like, I'm picking up this game and no one's going to make fun of me anymore.
I mean,
Let's.
again, I work at a school, and
Mhm.
it seems like 50% of the people that we hire now under 30 play D&D.
Right, right.
Uh, and they inevitably come find me because they're like, "Oh, you're the guy that wrote the D&D book. The other people under 30 told me about you."
When I came to UWM, maybe there was still that still hidden footnote stigma, because I mean, people would be like, so what do you study? I'd be like, tabletop role play games, like really quickly. And then everyone was like, oh, we have like 4 different games here at UWM. I will also mention, I feel like Wisconsin, again, today's not a good example, but generally the weather around, December through March, the tabletop role playing games are a fantastic escape from looking what's happening outside. So this has always been a bit of a hotbed. One of the reasons that I moved to Wisconsin from San Diego
You
was,
fool!
yeah, right, was because I wanted to be near the nexus where this thing was created. You know what? That's right. There's still arcane vibes emanating from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It's just like Guinness. The closer you get to Dublin, the better your Guinness tastes. The closer you get to Lake Geneva, the better your tabletop role playing game will be. Should we read?
I mean, I think you have a point there, frankly, but I'll leave
Okay.
that there. And with that, I
Uh,
will open the cover of the Player's Handbook, past the
ah!
gorgeous Jeff Easley cover art, which I guess, again, since I have a camera and this is nominally going up on YouTube, ooh,
Yeah. But
podcasters,
so,
those, go ahead.
I know. We've only got an hour to take bed, but have you ever wondered? Like, we could spend an hour on the cover. Have you ever wondered what's going on in this cover? Is that the player character? Is the player character being chased? Why is the character just? I've always wondered. It's not
I
one of my favorite covers. I
Oh, I
like it
love it.
because of what you do.
I
Okay.
I absolutely love it because I feel like the so there, again, for those of you on podcast, there is a horseman who appears to be ready to charge off the cover, and I feel like the eyes of the horseman are staring at you, and he's gripping the reins, but it looks like he's pointing when he's gripping the reins. It looks like he's pointing at you. He's got his sword up. I mean, it looks like you need to open this book and figure out how to defend yourself. Like that's what I very much take from this cover. I love the cover because I love the action of it. I love how it just seems to really burst off the page and seize you. Um, and again, everything about it is beautiful. I mean, the horse's head, the design of the fighter. Oh, it's just
Yeah,
beautiful stuff.
Jeff Easley, who will be at Gary Con, is fantastic. Did you say, I don't know if you answered, is he the player character or is he coming for you?
I feel like you the reader are the
Uh-huh.
player character, and I feel like this is a foe coming to hit you.
Interesting. I,
That's
as a
my read.
kid, like now I don't know. Now I've
Yeah.
changed my mind. When I was a kid, I was positive this was like this is who you become. I know that James Malazewski. I hope I'm saying his name right. So my apologies if I'm
It is
not.
very Polish.
Yeah, okay.
I'm Polish too, so
Uh, from Grognardia has mentioned, I think one of the things he talks about covers a lot, and I love his analysis of the covers. And he talks about how he likes the covers when they are able to represent what the game actually means. And I think one of his criticisms is, there's only one character that you can see. The other character looks like there's two characters in the back in shadow. They both kind of look like fighters. So you don't get a sense of like there's wizards or rogues or thieves. It's not a group. It's not like it's I got to
I mean I would agree
the Player's Handbook
it's
first
less of a
edition.
demonstration of teaching.
Right.
And again,
Yeah.
the art in a role-playing game, especially in a D&D book, has instructive value and it teaches you things about how to play the game. But again, I would tell you that it's correct to say that this is not so didactic, but it's just so engaging.
Yeah, I
Again,
agree. Right. Yeah.
all right, so let us begin. Um, Forward to the second edition. It has been a long time getting here. I don't mean months, perhaps even years. You may have waited for a revised, expanded, and improved second edition of the AD&D game. I mean the long time it has taken me to reach this point, the writing of the foreword. Forewords are written last, so that you can summarize your feelings and experiences about the book you have written. It is not accurate to say this is a book that I alone have written. First off, there are a lot of other names listed in the credits. I feel like I have to point out here, compared to later editions of D&D, it is a remarkably thin list of people who worked on this. And I suppose I'd never considered before that as D&D ages and we get more and more editions, the new editions seem to usually have more and more designers on them. The reports I'm getting about R5, the revised fifth coming out in 2024, is we may have again a sparse and pared down list of people who worked on it. The reports I'm hearing are it's kind of Chris Perkins, Jeremy Crawford, and that's the core team right there. But I'm saying this in March of 2024, so we just need to wait a few months and we'll see what the masthead of the R5 Player's Handbook says. Although Mike Shea at Lazy Dungeon Master, he said that we should refer to this as 2024 D&D. And I'm like, that's a pretty good moniker actually for what is coming out. Especially if they are like planning on stopping editions and just doing minor revisions. I think that Mike Shea's 2024 D&D might be the moniker that sticks, but we shall see.
It's
Anyway,
kind of like doing the EA Sports, like the FIFA 98, and now we're going to be doing D&D 24, D&D 25. We should be careful because that idea could be picked up by Wizards of the Coast, and the next thing you know, that's exactly what they're doing. We've got to buy a new version every single year, right?
so well, this was on the record, so I'll just tell it to you. I was interviewing Ray Wininger, who's a former D&D designer. He designed D&D, I think it was 2019 to 2022. I think he was the I shouldn't say lead designer. He was the head of the D&D team. And his pitch was uh, starting in 2024, you do a revised player's handbook in 2024 for the 50th anniversary. The next year, you do the monster manual. The next year, you do the DMG. The next year, you also revise, I think it's Monsters of the Multiverse. And then the year after that, you start over again. And every year, a new D&D core book comes out in a revised form. You don't do huge text changes; they just kind of get a glow up. The rules are pretty much 100% backwards compatible from now on, but every year, for forever, you get one new revised core book, and it was a really interesting idea. At least it's a vision of how to take D&D forward. You could certainly argue about whether or not it's a good one, and if you think it's a like cash play to have to buy. The thing is, you don't have to buy it. It's just a revised version, fix some things, polish up the cover art. Dungeon Crawl Classics seems to kind of do that exact thing, and it seems to work for them. Where people are just like, oh, I'm going to collect all the different versions of Dungeon Crawl Classics. Uh, but again, clearly it is not what they have gone with.
Well, that a company like Goodman Games can get away with it because they've done such an amazing job of being not, they Wizards of the Coast has never done it. Well, I should say these days.
Yeah,
Certainly
there's a these
Wizards of the
days.
Coast, yeah, had a much better back in the day. Wizards of the Coast had a much better relationship with the fans and was definitely had more of an entanglement with they were fans making games. And now we don't have that. I gotta say Goodman Games can do almost anything. We love them because they're at game conventions, they're running games all the time. They talk the same lexicon the gamers do. We really have a division between modern. I mean, it's impossible not to watch YouTubes and the regular YouTubers that are talking about Dungeons and Dragons role playing games. Wizards of the Coast is now always contextualized as the corporate. I mean, and often we don't even say Wizards of the Coast. It's always Hasbro, because we like to think of Hasbro as this monolithic toy manufacturing company that does not have our needs and interests. So again, Goodman Games is so much, and I could just think as soon as I think about Dungeon Crawl Classics, I think about them always being at conventions. I think about the stands they have in the dealers hall at GaryCon and how unbelievably approachable those folks are. I think about when those games are run at conventions, how they're so unbelievably inclusive to people coming in. I also think about the people like me when we come to running games at conventions. It's almost always something like TCC because we love it so much.
All right, I got through a paragraph. I'm going to see if I can get through another one before we talk. So the last thing I said was there's a lot of names listed in the credits, and I was like, not compared to today. So lots of names listed in the credits. They, especially the editors, contributed time and talents that I don't have. Improving the organization and readability was one of the reasons we started this project in the first place. These are tasks that can't be done without talented editors who play and care about the game. And I guess I'll mention editing here is led by Mike Breault, Breault. Um, if you discover that it's easier to find rules during your gaming sessions and that everything seems to make more sense, thank the editors. Even with the editors, this is not our work alone. None of this would ever have come into being without interested and involved players. The people who really decide what needed to be done for the second edition are the players who mailed in questions, everyone who wrote an article for Dragon Magazine, and everyone who buttonholed me or other designers at conventions. These were the people who decided what needed to be done, what needed fixing, what was unclear, and what they just didn't like. I didn't sit in a vacuum and make these decisions. As the designer and developer, I had to make the final choice, but these choices were based on your input, and your input is the most valuable asset we have going. So, how do I feel? Excited, exhausted, relieved, and nervous all at once. It's a great bag of emotions. I'm excited to see this book come out. I've spent more time on this than I have on any other single work I've done. That leads to exhaustion. The second edition has demanded and received hours upon months of attention. Now that it is finally coming out, the feeling of relief is beginning to set in. There were times when the task looked impossible, when it seemed it would never end, or when everything was going wrong. Only now, when it's in its final stages of polishing, am I beginning to realize that it is really done. And of course, there is nervousness. The AD&D game is the granddaddy of all role-playing games. You've made it perfectly clear that you liked the first edition of the AD&D game, even with all its warts. I liked and still like it. So now, with the arrival of second edition, of course I'm nervous. None of this comes as any surprise. I volunteered to prepare the second edition because I wanted to do something for the game I liked. The 10 years of experience I've had in game design has shown me what works and what doesn't, and sometimes even why. I love that line, so I'm going to read it again. The 10 years of experience I've had in game design has shown me what works and what doesn't, and sometimes even why. At the start, we outlined the goals to make it easier to find things, to make the rules easier to understand, to fix the things that did not work, to add the best new ideas from the expansions and other sources, and most important of all, to make sure the game was still the one you knew and enjoyed. Of them all, the last was the hardest and most demanding, conflicting as it did with my basic desire to design things. Uh, I want to point out here again, he has put his finger on one of the dangers of designing a new edition of D&D, which is it's not a game that's yours in some way, even if you're the lead designer. It's a game that already exists out in the world and people are playing. And if you change it too much, people will push back. It's what happened with second edition. Even though again that was a good game, especially in its essentials version. But people said it just didn't feel like D&D.
You mean fourth edition?
What did I say?
You said second.
Oh yeah, yeah, fourth. Thank you. Thank you.
It's
Thank
funny
you.
because I
Thank
was thinking exactly the same thing. Fourth edition is exact avatar for what you're describing, which was an edition where the designers who were rather, who it was Jonathan Tweet,
No,
Skip
that's third.
Williams,
Fourth was Heinso,
Heinz. Yeah, right.
Collins, and Wyatt.
Yeah, they're brilliant, right? And the
Oh yeah,
design of that game is rather amazing. But it is, as everybody, there is no more core narrative to fourth edition than this is a great game. It's not Dungeons and Dragons.
yeah. Of all of them, the last was the hardest and most demanding, conflicting as it did with my basic desire to design things. Fortunately, things didn't rest on me alone. Lots of eager eyes, from those of fellow designers to those of enthusiastic players, minutely examined this book and restrained me from overzealousness. It hasn't always been easy to walk the fine line between not enough and too much. In the past 2 years, I've talked to interested players many times, hearing their concerns and sharing my ideas. It was at the end of one of these talks at a convention in Missoula, Montana, just as I described some rules change, that one of the listeners smiled and said, "You know, we've been doing that for years." And that is what the second edition is all about, collecting and organizing all those things that we as players have been doing for years. David Zeb Cook, January 1989. Man, a lot jumps out at me there. I think I'm just gonna mention what they mentioned at the end there, which was Zeb Cook was being sent to conventions in Missoula, Montana. Not exactly a thrumming metropolis, and yet that was how dedicated TSR was to its fan base, that they were sending out lead designers to conventions in Missoula, Montana. And again, it certainly seems like D&D, the Wizards is getting better about sending people out. But it's hard to imagine them ever reaching that level of dedication to communication with the fans and promoting their own work by hand, for lack of a better way of putting it. Any thoughts, Scott?
Well, I think the main thought that I had as we're reading that, I mean, I said this at the beginning, is one of the things that's so interesting about this is it comes from such a human subjectivity. It's so difficult to read Zeb Cook's words and not hear them coming from somebody that you can empathize or sympathize with, at the very least. This concept that he's been entrusted, and certainly was not solely entrusted. I think one of the things that, if we are continuing to read the second edition Player's Handbook, and maybe we should, is we've got to talk about the historical context, because and you're the expert on these things, but I can't imagine. It's so funny that the way that we read this when we were in high school or junior high school is so different than we read it now, because we can now read in between the lines of what's going on, right? You just mentioned about the response, and he's of course even explicitly mentioning it, with the responsibility that he has to shepherd a game into a new age, but make sure that it feels like the old game that they've been playing for so long. And he's operating not under just that responsibility, but also, of course, the capital responsibilities of what was happening at TSR at the time. And I think it would be really funny to get into that, because I can't, when I'm reading this and I'm thinking about it in between the lines, I'm instantly thinking about your book and thinking about how Gary had wanted to make a second edition, but he was like, Gary, well, meet Gary. And that had shortly kind of happened, before kind of this happened. It's impossible to think about what this would be like if Gygax had kind of worked on it as well. And it's hard not to think about how difficult it must have been to be David Zeb Cook at this time, right? Operating, and I mean, he was friends with some of these people that had left. He was certainly a lover of this game that had been invented in 1979, and here he is with this amazing responsibility to kind of bring people into a way to bring people into a new edition that was going to be a little bit more accessible, that wasn't necessarily going to be designed specifically for the crowds that the original versions had been for, which are people that are already been interpolated and already understood concepts from wargaming, from hit points to, attack matrices. Right now he's making a game, now that we've had these 20, not 20, but let's see, 1989 to 10 years, I guess, of becoming a bit of a pop culture phenomenon, that they knew that there was a wider audience, so this game had to be easier to understand and to play, which was one of the things I was excited about, because we were, high schoolers, and we always struggled with exactly how do you play this game. And I and we never even understood the difference between basic D&D and AD&D. Again, no internet back then, so you had to do your best figuring these things out. But the other thing I wanted to mention is hard not to read the second edition. This is a new podcast. I know it's very similar to the one that we're kind of moving into, but it's hard not to read this and think about the nervousness and the excitement that David Zebgook is communicating to us, and thinking that we also have some of the same emotional resonance for us, because we're doing something new as well around similarly the same topic, right?
Wow. Designing a new edition of Dungeons and Dragons seems to be a singularly fraught creative and technical challenge. Because as mentioned before, again, you don't want to go too far. But people want some things changed. And yet, how many game designers, and again, there are some, but how many game designers can go out and look at people playing the game and see how they fixed it and be like, that's a great idea. Let's take that idea, just suck it in. Because I know that they did that in third edition. I know that they did that in fifth. And clearly they did it in second too. Thaco, as I understand it, was taken from competitive play. Like looking at I'm staring at my Legend of the Five Rings collection right across from me here. And the fourth edition of that game, best version for the rules. First edition, best version for the lore and the background and getting you excited about the world. Um, and Legend of the Five Rings was a successful game, but at its peak, how many people were playing that role-playing game? 10,000 people? 50,000 people? And again, with D&D, we're in the hundreds of thousands at various if not millions, depending on when we're talking about, definitely in the millions now. And just the amount of creative energy thrown at that system really is an amazing resource for the designer. Anyway, we should probably wrap up here. Let's go into end show. So again, I am Ben Riggs. I'm a journalist, historian, and apparently internet gadfly. So if you have not read my book, Slaying the Dragon: A Secret History of Dungeons and Dragons, please do go out and acquire a copy anywhere books are sold. This is Reading D&D Aloud. I have purchased the domain of readingdndaloud.net, so I would assume at some point there will be a website. I sure hope that some of you are watching this on YouTube and the rest of you are listening on a podcast. Google Podcasts is going away very shortly if you haven't heard about it. So if you're listening to us on Google Podcasts, please move over to, I guess, YouTube Music or another pod app of your choice. I like Spotify, and I'll try and get us on Spotify too. Scott, what's up with you?
Well, if you have any children that have difficulty falling asleep at night, you're always welcome to write me at the email address that Ben gave at the beginning of the show.
That was Scott at readingdndaloud.net.
Thank you very much. And you can request my dissertation, which again is all about these different kind of realities, and how honestly the creation of realities in our tabletop role-playing game Tabletop is rather similar to almost all the realities that we create around us. But yeah, I'm always happy to share my dissertation. At some point I got to write a book as well. Boy, that seems like a heavy lift. But first of all, big thank you to Ben for kind of running and getting this podcast going, but also an enormous thank you to all of the followers and the listeners out there who have shared ideas. I sound like Zeb Cook, who have told us so much that they do like the podcast, giving us ideas and what we should talk about. But obviously, it's been an extremely fun experience as we go into kind of new area of reading D&D aloud, to have folks that are coming along with us for the ride, and we very much appreciate you.
Then I'm going to say like, listen, and subscribe, and you'll hear from us again next week. You have a good day, Scott.
You do the same.
Bye bye.